At the yacht party, beneath strings of golden lights and the clink of champagne glasses, Eva Sinclair laughed and said it straight to Grant Maddox's face. "I could leave you right now." She said it casually, like his presence meant nothing at all. Grant stood still, his chest tight, his mind flooding with memories he'd believed were real. Then he looked up, met her eyes, and answered quietly. "Go ahead." What makes a man who once feared loss above all else willing to let go? Grant Maddox had learned to live small. After the divorce, he'd rebuilt his life around routines that kept things predictable. Morning coffee while his son ate cereal. Drop-off at school by 7:45. Work until 5. Dinner together every night. Bedtime stories read in the same chair by the window. He didn't date. He didn't go out. He told himself it was because his son needed stability. And that was true, but it was also because Grant didn't trust himself to choose well anymore. His ex-wife had left when their son was 3. She'd said she felt trapped, suffocated by motherhood and marriage. Grant had tried to fix it, tried to be enough, but she'd already decided. The divorce was quick and clean. She moved to another state, sent birthday cards twice a year, and called on holidays. His son asked about her sometimes, and Grant always said the same thing. "She loves you, she's just busy." He didn't know if that was true, but it felt kinder than the alternative. So when his friend Brian mentioned a woman at a dinner party, Grant almost said no. Brian was persistent. He said her name was Eva Sinclair, that she worked in marketing, that she was kind and easy to talk to. Grant agreed to coffee just to stop the conversation. He didn't expect anything. He told himself it was practice, a way to prove he could still sit across from someone and make small talk without feeling like a failure. The coffee shop was quiet on a Saturday morning. Eva arrived exactly on time, wearing a navy sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back in a low ponytail. She smiled when she saw him, a soft, genuine smile that didn't ask for anything. They ordered lattes and sat by the window. She asked about his work first, then his son, and when Grant mentioned bedtime stories, she laughed and said her father used to read to her every night until she was 12. The conversation felt easy. She didn't try too hard. She didn't fill every silence with chatter. When Grant mentioned he needed to leave soon to pick up his son from a friend's house, Eva said she understood and didn't suggest extending the date. They met again the following week. This time they walked through the park near Grant's neighborhood. It was late afternoon, and the light came through the trees in soft gold streaks. Eva talked about her job, about a project that had gone wrong, and how she'd learned to let go of things she couldn't control. Grant found himself talking about the divorce, something he rarely did with anyone. Eva listened without interrupting, without offering advice or reassurance. When he finished, she just nodded and said, "That sounds really hard." It was simple, but it was enough. Over the next few weeks, they fell into a rhythm. Coffee on Saturdays, walks on Sundays. Eva never pushed to meet his son right away, and Grant appreciated that. She seemed to understand that he needed to move slowly, that his life wasn't just his own anymore. When she finally met his son, it was at the park on a weekday afternoon. Grant had mentioned they'd be there, and Eva stopped by with ice cream cones. His son was shy at first, but Eva didn't force it. She sat on the bench and talked to Grant while his son played, and eventually the boy wandered over and asked what flavor she'd brought. Eva handed him a chocolate cone and said, "Your dad told me this was your favorite." His son grinned and ran back to the swings. Grant watched her that day and thought maybe this could work. She wasn't trying to replace anyone. She wasn't trying to fix anything. She was just there, calm and steady, and that felt like something he could build on. But there were small things. Things Grant noticed but didn't say out loud because they felt too minor to mention. The first was during a conversation about the park visit. Grant had told Eva how happy his son had been, how he'd talked about the chocolate ice cream all evening. Ava smiled and said, "That's sweet." But then later, when Grant mentioned it again in passing, she said, "Wait, what was he wearing that day? I can't even remember." Grant had just described it the night before. A red shirt with a dinosaur on the front. It wasn't a big deal. People forgot details, but it stuck with him. The second thing happened a few weeks later. They were at Ava's apartment, watching a movie on her couch. Her phone rang, and she glanced at the screen, then stood and walked out onto the balcony. Grant could see her through the glass, pacing, her voice sharp and fast. When she came back inside, she sat down and said, "Sorry, just an old friend. He's going through some drama." Grant asked if everything was okay, and Ava waved it off. "He's fine, just annoying." She didn't offer more, and Grant didn't push. Everyone had a past. Everyone had people who called at bad times. The third thing was smaller, but sharper. Grant's son had a recital at school, a little performance where the kids sang songs and read poems they'd written. Grant had invited Ava a week in advance. She'd said yes immediately, said she wouldn't miss it. But the morning of the recital, she texted, "So sorry. Work emergency. I'll make it up to him, I promise." Grant read the message twice, then put his phone away. His son had asked that morning if Ava was coming, and Grant had said yes. At the recital, his son looked toward the door a few times, then stopped looking. On the drive home, Grant said, "Ava had to work. She's really sorry." His son nodded and stared out the window. Grant told himself it was fine. Work happened. Emergencies happened. But the disappointment on his son's face stayed with him longer than he wanted to admit. 5 months in, Ava brought it up over dinner at her apartment. They were eating takeout on her couch, and she set down her fork and looked at him. "I've been thinking," Ava said. "Maybe we should try living together." Grant's chest tightened. He hadn't expected this. They'd never even talked about it. Ava leaned forward, her expression soft and earnest. "I don't want to keep being on the outside, Grant. I want to be part of your life, really part of it. I want to be there for you and for him." Grant felt the pull of it, the idea of not being alone anymore, the idea of his son having a woman in the house again, someone who could be there when Grant couldn't. He thought about the recital, about the missed moment, and wondered if living together would make things easier. If Ava was there all the time, maybe she'd remember. Maybe she'd show up. But he also felt the weight of it, the risk. If this didn't work, his son would lose someone again. Grant had spent 2 years protecting his son from that exact pain, and now he was considering inviting it back in. Ava reached across the table and took his hand. "I know you're scared," she said quietly. "I get it, but I'm not going anywhere. I promise." Grant looked at her and wanted to believe it. He wanted to believe that this time he'd chosen right. He said yes. Ava moved in 3 weeks later. She didn't bring much, just clothes and a few boxes of books and decor. Grant helped her unpack, and they arranged her things around the house. She put candles on the mantel and a thick blanket over the back of the couch. She hung a print in the hallway, something abstract and colorful. It felt different. Not bad, just different. His son seemed okay with it. He liked that Ava made pancakes on Saturday mornings, even though they were always a little burnt. He liked that she laughed loudly at his jokes. Grant told himself this was good. This was what he wanted. But within the first week, things started to shift. Ava's clothes piled up on the chair in the bedroom. Dishes sat in the sink overnight. Grant didn't mind doing them, but he'd thought they'd share the work. When he mentioned it gently, Ava smiled and said, I know. I'm just used to living alone. I'll get better, I promise." Grant nodded and let it go. The second week, Ava forgot to pick up his son from school. Grant had a meeting that ran late, and he'd asked her that morning if she could do the pickup. She'd said, "Of course, no problem." But when Grant finally got out of the meeting and checked his phone, there were 3 missed calls from the school. He called back immediately, his heart hammering, and the receptionist said his son was waiting in the office. Grant left work and drove straight there. His son was sitting on a bench, swinging his legs, looking small and quiet. Grant knelt down and said, "I'm so sorry, buddy, there was a mix-up." His son nodded and didn't say anything. When Grant got home, Ava was on the couch, scrolling through her phone. He stood in the doorway and said her name. She looked up, and her eyes went wide. "Oh my God, Grant, I completely forgot. I'm so sorry. I got caught up with work stuff and it just slipped my mind." Grant felt the anger rise in his chest, but he pushed it down. His son was in the next room. He couldn't do this now. "It's okay," Grant said, even though it wasn't. "Just please don't let it happen again." Ava stood and hugged him. "I won't, I promise." The 3rd week, it was bedtime. Grant had a rule. No screens after 8 o'clock. It was something he'd held firm on since his son was young, and it worked. His son slept better, woke up easier, didn't fight about going to bed. But one night, Grant came home late from a work dinner and found Ava and his son on the couch, watching videos on her phone. It was almost 9. Grant stood in the doorway and looked at them. His son glanced up, then quickly looked away. Ava smiled. "We're just finishing this one. It's funny. You'll love it." Grant crossed the room and gently took the phone from her hand. "It's past bedtime," he said quietly. His son got up without arguing and went to brush his teeth. Ava looked at Grant, her expression somewhere between amused and annoyed. "Come on, Grant, it's not a big deal. Kids need to relax too." Grant set the phone on the table. "It is a big deal to me," he said. "We have rules for a reason." Ava sighed. "You're so strict. He's going to resent you if you don't loosen up." Grant didn't respond. He went to tuck his son in, read him a story, and when he came back out, Ava was in the bedroom with the door closed. Grant sat on the couch and opened his journal. He'd kept one since the divorce, a way to process things when his mind got too loud. He wrote about the phone, about the missed pickup, about the dishes and the clothes and the way Ava had brushed off his concerns. He wrote, "Maybe I'm being too hard on her. Everyone adjusts differently. I need to give her time." But even as he wrote it, he didn't fully believe it. The truth was starting to settle in, quiet and cold. Ava wasn't the person he'd thought she was. Or maybe she was, and he'd just been too desperate to see it clearly. Either way, he was stuck now. His son had gotten used to her. Ava was part of the house, part of the routine. If Grant ended it now, his son would ask why. He'd feel the loss. Grant couldn't do that to him. Not again. So he closed the journal and told himself he'd try harder. He'd be more patient. He'd make it work. Because the alternative was admitting he'd made another mistake, and Grant didn't think he could survive that. Grant kept trying. He cooked dinner every night while Ava sat at the table scrolling through her phone. He cleaned up after her, folding the blankets she left on the couch, putting away the shoes she kicked off in the hallway. He told himself it was temporary, that she'd settle in eventually. But the weeks passed and nothing changed. If anything, Ava seemed more comfortable taking up space without offering anything in return. One night, Grant sat at the kitchen table with his journal open in front of him. His son was asleep upstairs, and Ava was in the bedroom, watching something on her laptop. Grant stared at the blank page for a long time before he started writing. "He's already used to her," he wrote. "If I end this now, he'll have to go through loss again. I can't do that to him. I can't be the reason he loses someone else." He read the words back to himself and felt the weight of them settle into his chest. He was trapped, and he'd done it to himself. Ava's habits expanded. Her makeup took over the bathroom counter. Her clothes filled the closet and spilled onto the bedroom floor. Grant found himself stepping over her things just to move through his own house. When he suggested she keep her space a little more organized, Ava laughed and said, "You're so uptight, Grant. It's just stuff. Relax." But it wasn't just stuff. It was the slow erasure of the life he'd built, the routines he'd carefully maintained to keep things stable for his son. Grant didn't know how to explain that without sounding controlling, so he stopped trying. He started noticing other things, too. Ava never asked how his day was. She'd talk about her own work, her own frustrations, but when Grant tried to share something, she'd nod absently and change the subject. She didn't help with his son's homework or bedtime routine. She was just there, occupying space, taking up air. Grant wrote about it in his journal. "I'm doing everything I did before, but now I'm doing it for 2 people instead of 1. And somehow I feel more alone than I did when it was just me and him." Then Ava started mentioning someone named Marcus. It was casual at first. She'd say things like, "Marcus thinks I should ask for a raise," or "Marcus gave me some advice on that project." Grant didn't think much of it. Everyone had co-workers, but the mentions became more frequent. Marcus was smart. Marcus was funny. Marcus understood the pressure she was under at work. Grant started to notice a pattern. Whenever Ava was frustrated or upset, she'd talk to Marcus, never to Grant. One evening, Grant came home from work and found Ava on the couch, her phone pressed to her ear. She was laughing, her voice light and animated in a way it never was when she talked to him. When she saw Grant, she straightened up and said, "Hey, I'll call you back later." She ended the call and set the phone down. Grant put his keys on the counter and asked, "Who was that?" Ava smiled. "Just Marcus. He's dealing with some stuff at work and needed to vent." Grant nodded and went to check on his son. Later that night, after his son was in bed, Grant was cleaning up the kitchen when Ava's phone buzzed on the counter. The screen lit up with a text message. Grant didn't mean to look, but the words were right there. "Miss you. When can I see you again?" The message was from Marcus. Grant stood there, staring at the screen, his hands gripping the edge of the counter. He felt his pulse in his throat. When Ava walked into the kitchen, Grant turned to her and said, "Who's Marcus?" Ava glanced at her phone, then back at Grant. She didn't look concerned. "I told you, a co-worker. Why?" Grant pointed at the screen. "That doesn't sound like a co-worker." Ava picked up her phone, read the message, and laughed. "Oh my God, Grant, are you serious right now? He's just being dramatic. We're friends, that's it." Grant wanted to believe her. He wanted to think he was overreacting, that his past was making him paranoid. But the message didn't feel like nothing. It felt like something he should pay attention to. Ava stepped closer and put her hand on his arm. "You're being ridiculous," she said softly. "You know that, right? I'm with you. Not him. You need to trust me." Grant looked at her, and for a moment he almost apologized. But then he thought about the missed pickup, the broken promises, the way she talked about Marcus like he was more present in her life than Grant was. He didn't apologize. He just nodded and said, "Okay." Ava kissed his cheek and walked back to the bedroom. Grant stood in the kitchen alone and felt something crack open inside him. He didn't know if it was doubt or clarity, but either way it hurt. The messages from Marcus kept coming. Grant didn't go through Ava's phone, but he saw the notifications when they popped up. Lunch plans, inside jokes, late-night texts. Ava never hid her phone, which made it worse somehow. She acted like there was nothing to hide, and maybe that was the point. Maybe she wanted Grant to see it. Maybe she wanted him to know he wasn't enough. Grant wrote in his journal almost every night now. "I keep asking myself if I'm being paranoid, if I'm projecting my past onto her. But I don't think I am. I think I'm just finally seeing what's been there all along." He closed the journal and stared at the ceiling. His son was asleep down the hall. Ava was beside him in bed, scrolling through her phone, and Grant felt more alone than he had in years. Then came Ava's birthday. She brought it up one morning over coffee, her voice bright and expectant. "I've been thinking about my birthday," she said. "I want to do something big this year, something special." Grant asked what she had in mind, and Ava smiled. "A yacht party, on the water, with all my friends. It'll be amazing." Grant felt his stomach drop. A yacht party meant money. It meant a crowd of people he didn't know. It meant putting on a smile and pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. But Ava was already talking about the guest list, about the caterer she wanted to hire, about the dress she'd seen online. Grant tried to interject, tried to suggest something smaller, but Ava cut him off. "Come on, Grant, don't be boring. This is important to me. You love me, right? Or do you just want me to sit at home and serve you and your son?" The words hit harder than they should have. Grant didn't answer right away. Ava stared at him, waiting. Finally, Grant said, "Fine, we'll do the yacht." Ava's face lit up. She kissed him on the cheek and started making calls immediately. Grant sat at the table and felt the trap close tighter. He told himself this was the last thing. After the party, he'd reassess. After the party, he'd figure out what to do. But deep down, he already knew. He just wasn't ready to admit it yet. The next 2 weeks were a blur of planning. Ava was consumed with the party. She spent hours on the phone, coordinating details, ordering decorations, sending out invitations. Grant paid for it all. The yacht rental was $4,000. The catering was another $2,000. Ava wanted a specific champagne that cost $60 a bottle, and she ordered 10 cases. Grant didn't argue. He just handed over his credit card and watched the charges pile up. His son asked why Ava was so busy, and Grant said, "She's planning her birthday party." His son nodded and went back to his homework. Grant was grateful he didn't ask more questions. He didn't have the energy to explain. The night of the party arrived. Grant put on a suit and helped Ava zip up her dress. She looked beautiful. The dress was emerald green, fitted, elegant. She spun around and smiled at him. "How do I look?" Grant said, "You look great." Ava kissed him quickly and grabbed her clutch. "Let's go. I don't want to be late." They drove to the marina in silence. Ava checked her phone the entire way, texting people, confirming arrivals. Grant kept his eyes on the road and tried to ignore the knot in his stomach. The yacht was everything Ava had wanted. White and sleek, strung with lights that glowed against the darkening sky. Guests were already arriving, stepping aboard in heels and tailored jackets, holding glasses of champagne. Grant recognized a few people from photos Ava had shown him, but most were strangers. Ava grabbed his hand and pulled him onto the deck. Music played from hidden speakers. Waiters circulated with trays of hors d'oeuvres. Ava immediately broke away to greet her friends, leaving Grant standing alone near the railing. He tried to blend in. He talked to a few people, made small talk about the weather and the boat. But he felt out of place, like he was watching someone else's life unfold in front of him. Ava moved through the crowd effortlessly, laughing, hugging, posing for photos. She didn't look back at him once. Grant stepped away from the crowd and walked toward the back of the yacht. The air was cooler there, quieter. He leaned against the railing and looked out at the water. The city lights reflected on the surface, blurred and distant. He thought about his son at home with the babysitter, probably already asleep. He thought about the money he'd spent on this party, the hours Ava had spent planning it, and how little any of it seemed to include him. He was about to go back inside when he heard voices. Low, familiar. He turned and saw 2 figures standing near the far corner of the deck, half hidden by shadows. One of them was Ava. The other was a man Grant didn't recognize. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark suit. They were standing close. Too close. The man's hand was on Ava's waist and she was laughing, her head tilted back. Then the man leaned in, and Ava didn't pull away. Grant watched as they kissed. It wasn't a quick, accidental brush of lips. It was slow, deliberate, intimate, the kind of kiss that came from familiarity. Grant's chest tightened. His hands gripped the railing. He felt like the deck was tilting beneath him, like the air had been sucked out of his lungs. He wanted to look away, but he couldn't. He just stood there, frozen, watching the woman he'd let into his life, into his home, into his son's world, kiss someone else like Grant didn't exist. When they finally broke apart, Ava said something Grant couldn't hear, and the man laughed. Then Ava turned, and her eyes landed on Grant. For a second, neither of them moved. Then Ava's expression shifted. Not guilt, not shame, just mild surprise, like she'd been caught doing something slightly inconvenient. She walked toward him, the man following a few steps behind. Grant didn't move. He couldn't. Ava stopped in front of him and said his name. Her voice was calm, almost amused. "Grant." He looked at her, then at the man standing beside her. Up close, Grant could see he was younger than both of them, maybe late 20s, with sharp features and an easy confidence. Ava gestured toward him and said, "This is Marcus." Grant felt the name land like a punch. Marcus, the co-worker, the friend, the one who'd been texting Ava for weeks, filling the space Grant should have occupied. Marcus extended his hand, and Grant stared at it. He didn't shake it. Marcus dropped his hand and smiled, unbothered. "Nice to finally meet you," Marcus said. Grant didn't respond. He looked at Ava and said, "What is this?" Ava sighed, like Grant was overreacting to something trivial. "It's not what you think," she said. Grant's voice came out low and tight. "Then what is it?" Ava glanced at Marcus, then back at Grant. "It's complicated," she said. Grant felt something inside him snap. "Complicated," he repeated. "You just kissed him in front of me, and you're telling me it's complicated." Ava's expression hardened. "Don't make a scene, Grant. We're at a party." Grant looked at her, and for the first time, he saw her clearly. Not the woman he'd wanted her to be, not the version he'd built up in his mind, but the person standing in front of him. Selfish, careless, cruel, and still, even now, she expected him to stay quiet, to swallow it, to make himself smaller so she could keep taking up space. Ava crossed her arms and tilted her head. "You know what, Grant?" she said, her voice light, almost playful. "I could leave you right now." She said it like it was a joke, like she was testing him, waiting to see if he'd beg her to stay, waiting to see if he'd prove, once again, that he needed her more than she needed him. Grant stood there, the words echoing in his head. "I could leave you right now." He thought about his son, asleep at home. He thought about the months he'd spent making excuses for her, justifying her behavior, convincing himself that staying was the right thing to do. He thought about the man he'd become in this relationship. Small, quiet, invisible. And he realized something. If he stayed now, if he let this moment pass, he'd be teaching his son the worst lesson of all. That love meant accepting disrespect. That being a good man meant letting people walk all over you. Grant looked at Ava, then at Marcus, then back at Ava, and he said, quietly and clearly, "Go ahead." Ava's face went blank. She stared at Grant like she'd misheard him, like the words didn't make sense. Marcus shifted uncomfortably beside her, his confidence dimming. The music from the party drifted across the deck, laughter and voices blending into background noise. Grant didn't move. He just stood there, waiting. Ava recovered quickly. She let out a short laugh and shook her head. "You're joking," she said. Grant didn't respond. Ava's smile faded. Grant, come on. Don't be dramatic. We can talk about this later. Grant looked at her, then at Marcus, then back at her. There's nothing to talk about, he said. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. Ava's expression shifted from disbelief to anger. You're really going to do this? Here, at my party? Grant nodded. Yeah, I am. Ava stepped closer, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You're making a mistake. You're going to regret this. Grant shook his head slowly. The only thing I regret is not doing it sooner. He turned and walked toward the exit. Behind him, he heard Ava call his name, but he didn't stop. People were watching now, their conversations trailing off as they noticed the tension. Grant didn't care. He walked through the crowd, past the champagne and the lights and the carefully arranged facade, and stepped off the yacht onto the dock. The air felt colder on solid ground. Grant pulled out his phone and called a cab. While he waited, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned and saw Ava hurrying down the dock, her heels clicking against the wood. Grant, wait, she said, her voice different now. Softer, almost pleading. Grant stood still and let her catch up. Ava stopped a few feet away, her arms crossed over her chest. You can't just leave, she said. We live together. We can't just end this because you saw something you didn't like. Grant looked at her, and for a moment he almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I didn't just see something I didn't like, Ava. I saw who you really are. Ava's jaw tightened. What's that supposed to mean? Grant took a breath. It means you don't respect me. You never did. And I've been making excuses for it because I didn't want my son to lose someone else. But staying with you isn't protecting him. It's teaching him that it's okay to let people treat you like you don't matter. Ava's eyes flashed. So this is about your son? You're using him as an excuse to bail? Grant's voice stayed calm. No, this is about me. I'm not doing this anymore. You told me you could leave me right now, and I believe you. So go ahead. I'm not stopping you. Ava stared at him, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't find the words. Then her expression hardened. You're pathetic, she said. You know that? You're so scared of being alone that you'll ruin something good just because you can't handle a little uncertainty. Grant didn't flinch. If this was good, you wouldn't have been kissing someone else. Ava looked away, and for the first time, she seemed unsure. The cab pulled up to the curb, and Grant opened the door. He looked back at Ava one more time. I'll have your things packed by tomorrow. You can pick them up whenever you want. Then he got in the cab and closed the door. The ride home was quiet. Grant stared out the window and felt the weight of everything settle over him. He wasn't relieved. He wasn't happy. He just felt tired. But underneath the exhaustion, there was something else, something small and steady, a sense that he'd done the right thing. Not the easy thing, but the right one. When he got home, the babysitter was on the couch watching TV. She looked up in surprise. You're back early, she said. Grant paid her and thanked her, then locked the door behind her. He stood in the quiet house and looked around. Ava's things were everywhere, her shoes by the door, her jacket on the chair, her makeup scattered across the bathroom counter. Tomorrow, he'd deal with it. Tonight, he just wanted to breathe. He walked upstairs and checked on his son. The boy was asleep, his face soft and peaceful in the glow of the nightlight. Grant stood in the doorway and watched him for a long time. He thought about all the decisions he'd made to protect this kid, and how some of them had been wrong. But this one wasn't. This one was right. The next morning, Grant woke up early and started packing Ava's things. He worked methodically, folding her clothes, boxing up her books, gathering the small items she'd left scattered around the house. It took most of the day. By the time he finished, there were 6 boxes stacked by the front door. He sent Ava a text. Your things are ready. Let me know when you want to pick them up. She didn't respond for hours. When she finally did, it was brief. I'll come by tomorrow. Grant set his phone down and went to make dinner. His son asked where Ava was, and Grant said, "She's staying somewhere else for a while." His son nodded and didn't ask more questions. They ate spaghetti and talked about school. It felt normal. It felt okay. Ava came by the next afternoon. Grant heard the knock and opened the door. She looked tired, her hair pulled back, no makeup. She glanced at the boxes and then at Grant. "Can we talk?" she asked. Grant shook his head. "There's nothing left to say." Ava's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, Grant, I really am. I messed up. But we can fix this. I know we can." Grant felt the pull of it, the urge to believe her, to give her another chance, to avoid the confrontation. But he thought about the kiss, about Marcus, about the months of small betrayals that had led to this moment. He thought about his son upstairs, building a tower out of blocks, oblivious to the fact that his life was about to shift again. And Grant knew that letting Ava back in wouldn't protect his son. It would only show him that promises didn't matter, that boundaries didn't matter, that self-respect didn't matter. "No," Grant said quietly. "We can't fix this, and I don't want to." Ava's face crumpled. "You're really going to throw away everything we had?" Grant looked at her and said, "You already did that." He stepped back and gestured to the boxes. "Take your things and go." Ava stood there for a moment, then grabbed the first box. Grant helped her carry them to her car without speaking. When the last box was loaded, Ava turned to him one more time. "You're going to regret this," she said. Grant shook his head. "No, I'm not." She got in her car and drove away. Grant watched until she turned the corner, then went back inside and closed the door. The house felt different, lighter. He walked through each room, noticing the spaces where Ava's things used to be. The mantel without her candles, the couch without her blanket, the bathroom counter clear and clean. It wasn't perfect, but it was his again. That night, Grant sat at the kitchen table with his journal. He opened it to a blank page and stared at it for a long time before he started writing. "I spent months trying to make something work that was never going to. I told myself I was doing it for my son, but I think I was doing it for me. I was scared of being alone. I was scared of admitting I'd made another mistake. But the biggest mistake wasn't choosing Ava. It was staying after I knew she didn't respect me." He set down the pen and closed the journal. Then he went upstairs and knocked on his son's door. The boy looked up from his blocks and smiled. "Hey, Dad." Grant sat down on the floor beside him. "Hey, buddy, can we talk for a minute?" His son nodded. Grant took a breath and said, "You know how Ava hasn't been around much lately?" His son nodded again. "Well, she's not going to be living with us anymore." His son looked at him, his face thoughtful. "Why not?" Grant chose his words carefully. "Because sometimes people aren't a good fit for our family. And that's okay. It doesn't mean anything's wrong with us. It just means we need to make choices that are best for us." His son thought about that, then said, "Are we okay?" Grant nodded. "Yeah, we're okay." His son smiled and went back to his blocks. Grant sat there for a while, watching him build, and felt something settle inside him. The weeks that followed were quiet. Grant fell back into the routines he'd built before Ava. Morning coffee, drop-off at school, dinner together, bedtime stories. It wasn't exciting, but it was stable. It was theirs. And that was enough. One Saturday morning, Grant and his son walked to the park. The air was cool, the trees starting to turn. They threw a football back and forth, and his son laughed when Grant's throw went wide. Grant chased the ball down and came back grinning. They sat on a bench and shared a bag of pretzels. His son leaned against him, and Grant put his arm around him. "Dad?" his son said. Grant looked down. Yeah? His son was quiet for a moment, then said, I'm glad it's just us again. Grant felt his chest tighten. He kissed the top of his son's head and said, Me too, buddy, me too. They sat there for a while, watching other families play, listening to the sound of the wind in the trees. Grant thought about everything that had led to this moment. The mistakes, the compromises, the slow erosion of his own boundaries. And he thought about the choice he'd made on that yacht, to walk away, to choose himself, to show his son that love didn't mean enduring disrespect. It wasn't a happy ending, but it was a true one. And for the first time in a long time, Grant felt like he could breathe,